welcome to you all. Thank you for signing up and for listening today to this Energy Institute webinar, which is all about the application process to apply for professional membership and registration. My name is Terry Winter. I'm the Membership Development Manager at the EI, and a key part of my role is to advise individuals on their membership options and to guide people through the application process to get professional recognition. And I'm delighted to welcome Philip Johnson, who will be co-presenting the webinar with me today. Philip?
Hello, everybody. My name is Philip Johnson, and I'm an assessor as well as an interviewer for the EI. You'll be delighted to know I've done lots of assessments and lots of interviews over the years. In fact, I've been doing this activity for the EI since 2006. I also currently am the chair of the membership panel at the EI, so get to see lots and lots of applications.
Thank you, Philip. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on board, and I'm sure everyone is looking forward to what you have to say. A quick bit of admin, if I may. So this webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available via the EI's YouTube channel, and there'll be a link from our website to that, just in case you want to re-watch it, or if there are others that couldn't make it today. Secondly, it is an audio-only webinar, one way, which means Philip and I will be talking to you and taking you through some slides. However, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. But in order to do that, you'll need to type the questions. You'll see a speech bubble at the bottom of your screen, hopefully, and that will open the chat function. So if you have a question at any point, type your question in the chat box, and we'll answer those at the end when we have a Q&A session. Lastly, we don't anticipate there'll be any technical problems, but you just never know. So again, if you have any problems, for example, with your audio visuals, again, write a message to me in the chat box, and we'll do our best to resolve those. When you're typing questions, please, if you could direct them to me as the host, I'll be labelled as the Energy Institute. The webinar should last about an hour. Will hopefully be wrapped up somewhere between 1 and 1:15. So let's get started. Okay, so these are the topics for today. I'll start by talking very briefly about the Energy Institute, who we are and what we do. Following that, we'll run you through the different membership grades that you can apply for, both at introductory and professional level. Next, we'll go through the application requirements. So a step-by-step guide, if you like, on what you need to do to apply for professional membership and the different types of documents that you'll need to submit to form your application. At that point, I will hand you over to Philip, who's going to give you some really valuable advice on, well, two crucial parts of your application, the Professional Development Review, or PDR, and the competence grid. And Philip is also going to give you some details about the interview process, so what's expected of you in the interview. And as I said, we'll finish with some questions. Okay, so for those of you who don't know about us, the Energy Institute, well, we are the chartered professional membership body for energy, representing the entire energy sector. And we have contacts, members and networks all around the world. We cover all sectors in energy and all disciplines. So it doesn't matter if you are an engineer or a technician, you might be an energy manager or analyst, you might be an environmental professional, you might be an academic or a lawyer. It doesn't matter what your background is, as long as you do the work that you do in energy, in the energy industry as a whole, then we will be able to support you with your professional development. There will be an opportunity for you to gain membership and professional recognition with us. And that, I guess, is what makes us different from most other professional bodies, in that we are industry focused as opposed to discipline focused. Our aim or purpose is to bring together expertise to tackle urgent global challenges. And in order to tackle those challenges effectively, we need energy to be better understood, managed, and valued. And we help to achieve that in a number of ways. So, for example, we provide relevant training and events. We also do it by providing a wealth of up-to-date energy-related information, mainly online. We do it by producing renowned technical guidance, best practice, and industry standards. And of course, we do it by supporting people like you, our students who work in energy, and students who study energy, and professionals that work in energy. And the EI is international. We have a truly international presence. In addition to our 13 branches and 7 young professionals networks in the UK, we also have branches and YPNs worldwide in places such as Africa, Southeast Asia, and the Caribbean, just to name a few. And having this branch network is vital to both us and our members, because it allows for that local connection, that engagement on a local level, so you can feel part of the EI community wherever you may be. And you can see a web address on the slide there, so you can go to our website, find out where your nearest branch or YPN is, find out what's upcoming in your area, and if you do have the time, get involved. Our branches and YPNs would love to hear you if you want to get more involved with them. Okay, so moving swiftly on to our membership grades. And here are our 3 introductory grades of membership. On the left there, student is for those who are studying, either at undergraduate, postgraduate, or PhD level, or you might be on an apprenticeship. On the right-hand side, we have affiliate membership, and that's for anyone who works in energy or just has a sort of general interest in the energy scene, and they want to be kept up to date, for instance, through our magazines or our e-newsletters. And in the middle, you can see associate member, or AMEI, and that's for those who want to progress. They want to gain professional qualifications in energy, and they want to work their way up towards professional membership and possibly chartered recognition. Now, for all 3 of these grades, it's very easy to join. You just simply go to our website, click on EI, and follow the steps through. There's no assessment of your qualifications or experience, and you'll get immediate access to everything that the EI offers. Also important to note that it's mandatory to be registered as a member with us before you can upgrade, before you can submit an application for professional membership. So you have to take this first step. And this time we have our 3 professional grades of membership. So for these 3, you can't join online. You have to put together a written application, which is formally assessed by people like Philip and our membership panel. So we have technician member, or TMEI, and that's for technicians. That's for those who make things work ground level, they're solving technical problems, and they may be involved in the supervision and guidance of others. Member, or MEI, is for all experienced, competent professionals working in energy, working in responsible roles within energy. Members are innovators, they are often experts in their field, they'll have a good level of leadership and management skills, and they'll have a broad knowledge of the energy sector as a whole. And fellow, or FEI, is our highest grade of membership. It's for those that drive the profession, it's for the leaders, the influencers in the energy industry. Fellows will have worked at a senior level for a number of years, and they'll have an excellent level of leadership and management skills and an advanced knowledge of the energy sector. Now, one question we often get asked is, how many years experience do I need to apply for professional membership, to apply for one of these grades? Well, we normally recommend that you have 4, maybe 5 years minimum experience in energy, but that's not a hard and fast rule. And that's because it's less about time served and more about demonstration of competence. We've had candidates before who have slightly less than 5 years experience, but were successful. And on the other hand, we've had candidates who have many years experience and didn't make the grade. And that's because they weren't able to demonstrate the specific competencies for that grade. And Philip's going to talk about that in a lot more detail later on. And just a reminder, if you have any questions at any point, please type them in the chat function, and we will answer those in a Q&A session at the end. And please direct those questions to me, the Energy Institute, as the host. Okay, this slide shows the most typical membership journey, if you like. You'll begin as a student member whilst you are studying. Once you've finished your studies, you will upgrade to associate member or AMEI. And once you have relevant, sufficient experience in energy, we'd expect you to upgrade to professional membership or incorporated or chartered registration. Now, if you're an affiliate member with us and you want to upgrade, no problem. You don't need to transfer to associate membership before you submit your application for professional membership. Okay. Okay, so this next slide illustrates all the different professional membership grades and additional titles that we can award, and I'll try and simplify this as best I can. So on the left-hand side, you'll see the 3 professional membership grades that I've already described. They are the EI's professional membership grades, and you can absolutely apply for one of those on its own if you wish to. That is a form of professional recognition. You will need to go through the assessment process to obtain those grades. But you'll also see that we can award other titles. So in the middle section, you can see that we're licensed by the Engineering Council to award Chartered Engineer, Incorporated Engineer, and Engineering Technician registration. And similarly, we're licensed by the Society for the Environment to award Chartered Environmentalist registration. Now, unless you are already a professional member with us, you cannot apply for one of those additional titles on its own through the EI. You would need to apply for those together with one of our professional membership grades. So let's say, for example, you wanted to apply for Chartered Environmentalist. You would need to apply for either member or fellow along with that. Engineering Technician and Technician Member, they tend to come hand in hand. There's a lot of match between the competencies we're looking for those 2 titles. Now, on the right-hand side, you'll see our 3 exclusive chartered titles, namely Chartered Energy Engineer, Chartered Petroleum Engineer, and Chartered Energy Manager. Same rule applies for Chartered Energy Manager. You can't apply for that on its own. You need to apply for that together with either member or fellow. Slightly different for Chartered Energy Engineer and Chartered Petroleum Engineer, in that you have to apply for those in conjunction with Chartered Engineer or CEng. And as you know, you can't get CEng without also applying for member or fellow with us. So just to clarify, let's say you wanted to apply for Chartered Energy Engineer, you would also be applying for Chartered Engineer and member or fellow. But that's not 3 separate applications, that's one integrated application for 3 different titles. We've tried to make the process as straightforward as possible. Yes, you'll have to demonstrate different competencies, but you're only doing one integrated application and that's a really important point. I hope that's helped simplify it, but if you're still not sure, then feel free to ask us a question or approach me separately after the webinar. I just wanted to quickly draw your attention to a new route to MEI, to Member of the Energy Institute, that we introduced this year, and it's called the Professional Registrants Route. And it's specifically for those who are already registered as a chartered engineer, incorporated engineer, or chartered environmentalist with any other professional body. And you'll need to be currently working in energy and have a track record of working in responsible roles in the energy industry. Now, this might not be relevant to you, but you might have peers, you might have colleagues, you might know others that would be eligible for this route. So please do pass on the message. It's currently running as a pilot until the end of this month, so there's not long left to apply for MEI under the professional registrants route, but we are highly optimistic that it will be continued after that deadline. And if you do apply before the end of June, then we are waiving the application fee. Okay, so next we move on to the application process. The first thing you need to do is download an application pack. Go to our website. Once you've determined which grade or grades you're applying for, go to the membership and careers section of our website, scroll down to find the grade that you're interested in, and download an application pack. And that pack contains everything you need to apply, including 2 sets of really detailed guidance notes. And I can't reiterate enough how important it is to read through those guidance notes before starting your application. The first set of guidance is more general. It sort of explains how to approach your application, what types of documents you'll need to put together. And the second set of guidance will be more specific to the grade you're applying for. It will tell you if there's an educational requirement. It will tell you what the specific competencies are. Then go about completing parts A and parts B, which we'll go into in a second. Then make sure you proofread your application, get your sponsors to check through your application. And then when it's ready, you would submit it by email to that address on the screen, professionals@energyinst.org. So what does part A consist of? Well, these documents listed here. There'll always be an application form, which just asks you for your personal details, career history, qualifications. You'll need to sign the form, and you'll need to make it clear which grade you're applying for. In almost all cases, you will need to submit 2 sponsor references. Now, your sponsors don't need to be members of the Energy Institute necessarily, but they will need to be registered at an equivalent grade or higher than the one you're applying for. They will also need to fill out a sponsor reference form, which is found in the application pack. They will need to include detailed supporting comments on that sponsor reference form. The more supporting comments they provide, the better. And that's one reason why our assessors may return the application for more information, because your sponsors haven't added enough information on there. If you're applying for chartered engineer registration, then at least one of your 2 sponsors must be registered as a chartered engineer. Got a separate slide on CPD, or continuing professional development, so I'll explain that in just a moment. But just so you know, we not only do we need your CPD record to present, but we also need your future CPD plan. So how are you intending to maintain your energy related competence moving forward? We'll require an organisational chart just to show to whom you report and who reports to you, just to clearly show where you sit within your organisation. We'll need copies of your academic certificates and photographic ID. We don't need the originals, we just need copies, but they do need to be signed as true and accurate copies by someone else of professional standing. So, for example, one of your sponsors. You cannot sign those certificates or ID yourself. And please make sure it's a suitable form of ID, showing your photo, your date of birth, and your signature. So a driver's license or a passport are the two that spring to mind immediately. And there's an application fee, which varies depending on the grade you're applying for. Have a look at the membership page of our website for a full list of application fees. So for Part A, there's lots of different elements, lots of different documents. But for Part B, the pure focus is on your competence grid, demonstrating all the specific competencies that we're looking for. And Philip is going to give a lot more detail on that. So I will leave that with him. So we get asked a lot of questions about CPD, or continuing professional development. And I think it's often thought that CPD is purely a master's degree or a technical training course, but it's actually much more than that. CPD encompasses a huge range of different activities. So it could be listening to this webinar today, or going along to an event or conference if there wasn't a pandemic happening. It could be doing some independent research, some on-the-job learning. Maybe you're a mentor for someone else, or maybe you're doing some volunteer work. There's lots of stuff you can include as CPD, as long as it's relevant, as long as it's related to energy. You're doing it in the energy industry. And we have a really comprehensive guide. It's called The Best You Can Be. Really cheesy name, but it's well worth a read, and you can download that from the CPD section of our website. Something else that guide explains is how to record your CPD. There's a paper template form you can fill out, and we'd encourage you to do so. But we also have an online professional development tool called My Career Path. And that's an excellent tool because it's structured against the competencies that we're looking for the different grades. So if, for instance, you were working towards applying for Chartered Energy Manager, you could click on that profile on My Career Path, and you could start mapping your some of your experiences, some of your achievements, some of your training against those competencies. And what that means is that you're making a massive head start on your application when you come to write your CPD record, your PDR, and your grid. It's a really worthwhile activity. And in terms of the assessment process itself, when you submit your application, the EI's membership team will have a look at it first, provide an initial review, let you know if there's anything missing, or if you need to put it in a bit more detail in certain parts of your application. The membership team are not the experts. That's the membership panel. That's the assessor's job to scrutinise the content. We're just there to make sure it's in the best possible shape before it goes forward to our membership panel. We try to pick assessors, members of our panel who have a similar specialism to you, who have worked in the area that you do. And they will give you every opportunity to address any shortfalls, fill in any gaps. They'll give you some really, really detailed feedback on certain areas of weakness, if there are any, so that you can go away, put in some more information, and then resubmit. It's so hard to put a time frame on it, but we say it normally takes 3 to 4 months minimum. That obviously depends on the quality of your application and the route you're taking to our chartered titles. Interviews are mandatory for our professional registrations, such as Chartered Engineer and Chartered Environmentalist. And remote interviews are possible if we can't do face-to-face interviews, which is obviously particularly important at a time like this, when social distancing is so important. Okay, so at this stage, I'm going to hand you over to Philip, who is going to talk about the professional development review and the competence grid. Over to you, Philip.
As Terry was saying, I'm specifically going to spend a bit of time talking about the professional development review and indeed the competence grid. And these two things apply to all the memberships and professional registrations that the Energy Institute uses. So broadly, there are 5 areas of competence and commitment, and these are in front of you on the slide, and they need to be demonstrated in the professional development review and the competence grid. These things are looked at initially, before I go into a bit more detail of them, when your application moves out of stage 1, which is when it's received and looked at by people like Terry, and it moves then to a position where Terry will ask assessors to actually have a look at it and write a report. And the assessors basically are looking for evidence to match against these competencies and commitments. And now started to look at in a bit more detail about the A2E competencies. First of all, A and B are usually referred to collectively as underlying knowledge and understanding. I know it says application to practice there, but that's how they're usually assigned. And they're basically looking at your technical abilities, really, and it's all based on competence. And by technical, I mean the broad sense of the word technical. They might be financial abilities, it might be economic abilities, they might indeed be engineering abilities. So it is important to bear that in mind when I say technical. It's not just talking about technology per se. So in other words, if you're in the law and working in energy, you will have to demonstrate your ability to apply in practice, and the same will apply to if you're an analyst or an economist working in the field of energy. The C competencies are related to leadership and management, and indeed the development of people. They differ slightly between the professional registrations and the membership as to what level of competence you need to display, and that's simply because of the requirements of the licenses that are applied by the Engineering Council for Engineers and the Society for Environment for the Chartered Environmentalist. We have our own competencies for things like the Chartered Energy Manager. D and E, again, come more around the commitment level, and we're talking about here, can people communicate? So when you write your application and fill in these grids and produce these developments, that is a form of communication. So an assessor will take a view on how that's presented, and it isn't helpful if you present reams and reams of information. So part of communication is to be able to communicate in a succinct and indeed in a cogent manner. And then finally, the E competencies, which are real commitments. We're here looking at things like applying professional codes of conduct, health and safety, and perhaps the thing that Terry talked about, which was CPD earlier on, that is looked at in that competence. And as Terry was saying, people are expected to provide evidence of past CPD and indeed a plan for CPD going forward. And indeed, in some of the professional registrations now, it is mandatory that people do CPD and so on and so forth. So let's now move on and have a look at some examples of, first of all, the competence grids. People often say to us, why do we have to fill in a competence grid as well as a professional development review? And the real answer is they're complementary. And The grid is very specific. You can see one here for CN. I think we'll show you another one in a minute. But basically, you're enjoined to produce on the right there some bullets that will match up with being able to identify potential projects and opportunities. And it says here, there's some examples of what that might mean. They're not exhaustive, but you're then asked on the right hand side just to put in a few sentences about how you meet that competence. And the point to grab hold of here is that it's evidence based, so you should literally write in the evidence that shows that you meet that particular competence. And don't be worried about giving an example 2 or 3 times. That's absolutely fine. Assessors are quite relaxed about that. Some people can put in lots of examples, other people can't. As Terry was saying earlier, it's not what we're trying to assess here is not, you know, that you've got so many years of experience. What we're trying to assess is, have you met a threshold for a competence? And if you have, then you meet the standard. It's as simple as that. And if you pass that standard by, if you like, 1,000,000 miles, well, that's very good, but you still just passed the standard. So don't be worried about, you know, putting in lots and lots of information. You need to put in sufficient to show that you meet the minimum standard for the competence, and nothing more. That's fine, Terry, thanks. And here's the one for the, okay, here's the one for MEI, and this one's slightly different, and there's more competencies actually on MEI, but that doesn't mean to say they're necessarily more stringent or higher levels. They're somewhat different, a bit like that. And so you can see A1 here says, well, have you got an in-depth knowledge of your own sector of the energy industry and how it relates to the other sectors? So people will be looking for somebody to say on the other side of there how where they work in their own particular sector and how that links in the broader energy sector. It's surprising sometimes how narrow people can get if they're not careful. So they just need to sort of step back a bit and think, how do I meet this competence, and how do what I do relate to the wider energy sector? Now, you have to fill these competence grids in, as Terry was saying, but alongside them, you're also producing something called a PDR, Professional Development Review, and that's what I would call an extended piece of prose, really. So instead of writing in bullets, as you might do in the competence grids, you'll actually write in sort of sentences and paragraphs about your career. The easy way to do a PDR, or at least it was when I did mine, it would be to, I think, you know, start with your CV, but don't submit your CV. That's not what's required. The CV will allow you to actually build the professional development review. So how it says on this do's and don'ts slide, on the right there, don't submit your CV instead of a PDR, but I'm saying to you that you can start with your CV, that'll be in front of you, and you should build it out to actually produce a development review alongside the sort of number of words that we suggest. So again, as an assessor, I would appeal to people not to, how can I put it, well, just submit reams and reams of information. It's not necessary. Some obvious don'ts underneath that. Don't plagiarize. We very quickly are able to pick up things that are just pulled out of books or papers, and we as assessors take should we say, a very specific view about that. It's not very helpful, and it's unprofessional. Try not to leave any gaps in the grid. Again, we're only looking at what's put in front of us. You may know that you meet something and therefore you don't need to do this, or you don't think you need to do that. But all we can go on as an assessor is what's in front of us. So if there's gaps there, we assume that there's nothing to say. And so that, again, is unhelpful. And usually that can result in us going back via the membership panel to applicants and saying, please provide further information about this competence. We always like to give candidates the benefit of the doubt, but it just involves us in more work, to be honest. So please, you know, I'd implore you to all, don't leave any gaps. The last point, I guess, is fairly obvious, really, but don't go over or under the advised word count. You can, I think it says somewhere else, you can include additional information if you wish, but I would counsel against putting in, again, reams of information, as I call it. I've had CDs presented to me in some cases where I'm expected to go through lots and lots of detailed design work or calculations. It simply isn't necessary. You just need to say that you do that, give an example of it, and that will be sufficient as evidence from an assessor's standpoint. So although on the left there it says do include supplementary information, but only if it's relevant, and don't think that you need to actually, go into every detail of every example you give by submitting additional information. You don't. You just need to say what you do and say when you did it. Well, I'll come on to this more when we get to the interview, but you also need to be thinking about when you're writing your PDR or your filling in the competence grid, that it's lots of I did this, I did the other. I know it's countercultural, and I know we work in teams to achieve results, but we're trying to find out what you do and what your contribution is to the energy sector and the part of the energy sector that you work in. So we like to see lots of eyes. And indeed, I'll talk more about that when we get on to the interview slide. I think we've talked a little bit about this in passing, but it's worth just summarising here. The PDR, as I said, is a piece of prose, so you can actually write an introduction and give some reasons for why you want to join the EI. I think that's one of the most difficult things to do sometimes. You have to sort of sit back and reflect a little bit why it is you want to join the EI. But it's all part of, again, as I said earlier, the communication process. I think the key here is the fourth bullet down, which says, show your progression as an energy professional. And that, I think, you can lift usually from your CV and just flesh out what you've done, when you did it, what you achieved, what your objectives were, etc., etc. And that indeed follows then onto this clear and logical structure. You can, most people do actually cross-reference the competencies in the PDR, but whilst it's useful for an assessor because it draws my eye as an assessor to somebody claiming that what they just said there is, I don't know, the A1 competence or something, if I find that that doesn't satisfy me as meeting that competence, I will then go looking elsewhere, and I can go elsewhere in the PDR, or alternatively look into the competence grid, of course, because there will be a match into A1. So yes, do by all means cross-reference the competencies, but remember that isn't the end of it, and you've got the PDR, you've got the competence grid as well, and also the assessor will look right across the piece to tick their own boxes in terms of whether you have or haven't met the competencies. The competence grid itself, as it says here, is for you to give detail and very specific examples. As I say, people usually write in bullet form here, so it's not so much a piece of prose, but can be very specific and very targeted. The last bullet, I think, just sums up really, 200 to 300 words per competence, and make sure you address the competence. And finally, I would say in this section anyway, don't be frightened of actually reusing an example. I was looking at an assessment of somebody last week who'd put forward a number of things in evidence against some competencies. And it turned out that it was just one of the three things they put in was the one that met just so many of the other competencies. And I think they put that in as almost an afterthought. It was a piece of virtual reality development for energy control. And it was, very innovative and met a lot of the competencies that we look for as assessors. So I guess what I'm saying is, don't be worried if you've just done one thing that you think meets the competencies. There's no harm in actually putting that in 2 or 3 times. You don't have to go to other things. Okay, let's talk about the interview process, shall we? I think I would talk the interview process as one of life's great mysteries, really. People get quite concerned about it, but one thing I'll say to you immediately is that it's of more concern, believe it or not, to the interviewers usually than it is to the interviewee, and it is slightly more worrying or sitting on the other side of the table because you know, we as interviewers are concerned to find out about you, and also concerned that you will make the grade, believe it or not. And so we want to give interviewees every opportunity to demonstrate that they meet the competencies. Again, I keep mentioning this word competence. This is not, the interview is not an interview for a job or a job application, although a lot of job applications these days and interviews for them are competence based, a lot still aren't. This is genuinely a competence based discussion, and you are being enjoined to talk, chat, discuss with peers. So across the table there will be at least two people, and at least one of whom will have intimate knowledge of the area that you work in. So there there will be a good opportunity to talk one-on-one, and as I say, treating each other as peers. So what we're looking for is evidence again that you meet a particular competence. So again, you would be told at the beginning of the interview, or certainly all the interviews I do anyway, that we're looking for lots of I did this, I did the other, I was responsible for, and again, that's a little countercultural, but we're trying to assess what your contribution is. Length of time, 45 would be actually a very, very quick interview. It's more likely to be 60 to 80 minutes, I think, really, but it can be as low as 45 minutes. Towards the end of the interview, there's a break or cool-off period here. So towards the end of the interview, you're usually asked to leave the room or leave the online arrangement if it's an online interview. And what happens then is the two interviewers will compare notes and decide if they've asked sufficient to give them the evidence to put against the various competencies that you're being looked at. And then you're invited back into the room or the online event. And at that point, further questions will be asked if necessary. But perhaps more importantly, you will be given the opportunity to raise any other matter or detail that hasn't come up in the previous, should we say, 50 minutes, so that, you know, you can't ultimately say, well, I've only had raised this or told them about that. So we are keen to hear if something hasn't come up during the discussion and it was burning on your, if you like, on your heart to tell us about it. You'll also be given an opportunity to ask questions, and it's usually the questions are, well, what happens from here on in, etc., etc. And we understand that, and we answer that. Now, in terms of what happens after that, well, the interviewers write a report. The interviewers don't take a decision, they write a report, and that goes then back to the membership panel, which is, if you will, stage 4 of the process of membership or professional registration. And together with all the other written assessment that's been provided, together also with your application, that is looked at in the round, and then a decision is taken as to whether or not you should be awarded the either the title you've asked for or the membership grade you've asked for. Just to finish this off now, not all grades or professional registrations need an interview. Some interviews are mandatory, and they just you have to have an interview. So you know, I've had the pleasure of interviewing very, very senior people on main boards of PLCs because they have to have an interview. And so it's nothing to do, again, with how senior you are. It's related to the fact that the process says you have to have an interview. And then there are some things that are in the discretion of the assessor or the membership panel as to whether or not somebody should be interviewed. And if you make your application crystal clear, if I can use that expression, usually assessors and membership panel decide no interview necessary, and you will get elected to the grade applied for without an interview. So we can recommend an interview, but that's usually when the application isn't clear. So it goes back to things we discussed earlier about you making yourself very clear and very cogent and succinct in terms of telling us how you meet the various competencies. I think that's all I want to say about that. I think we'll probably move to Terry again.
Terrific, thank you, Philip. Really valuable insights, and I only have a couple more slides before we move on to the Q&A session. So an opportunity to ask both myself and Philip some questions about the application process or your own application. Okay, so what do you do next? What do you do from here? Well, if you're not already a member, then join, obviously. If you're looking to apply for professional membership, the first step is to join as an associate member. As I said at the beginning, it's very quick and easy. Join online, and that will give you immediate access to all the benefits and resources that we offer. I've put there that you go along to EI events and network with others. That's obviously difficult in the current climate, but no doubt there'll be opportunities to do that again. And in the meantime, sign up for webinars and other virtual events, which you can then add to your CPD record. We always recommend that you update your CPD as you go. It's so difficult to remember all the CPD that you've done over the many years when you're putting together your application. So update it as you go. Download the application pack and have a look at the guidance notes. Even if you are not ready to apply yet, maybe it's more of a goal for 2 or 3 years down the line, it's still worth downloading the application pack, reading the guidance, and have a look at what's required and what you need to aim for. And sign up for My Career Path, that online professional development tool if you can. That's free for members to use. The guidance notes will tell you if there's an educational requirement for your registration, and there are steps you'll need to take if that's the case. And something we always recommend that you do is a gap analysis exercise. So have a look at the Part B competence grid that Philip went through. Start filling it in. Start mapping your qualifications, training, experience, project activities, everything that's relevant against those competencies. And very quickly, I think you'll be able to determine whether that grade is suitable for you for a start, and if it is, whether you're ready to apply yet. And if there are gaps, then you can work towards filling those gaps. Talk to your employer, for example, to see how you could get, I don't know, more team management skills or anything like that. And I know we're all very busy people, but finding the time to sit down and get started is often the biggest hurdle. But if you can, then yeah, make time and get started. And we're here to help. Obviously, if you read the guidance notes carefully, then that will put you in good stead. You'll be on the right path. But you can also contact us. The membership team are here to help, and you can send us an email or give us a call with any questions you may have. And of course, talk to your sponsors, because part of their role is to check through your application, proofread your application, make sure that you are suitable for the grade you're applying for. That's part of their role, so ask them too. And that concludes the webinar today. So if you're leaving us straight away, thank you very much for listening. We hope you found at least some of it useful. if you are staying with us for the Q&A session, then please type your questions in the chat box now. I'm just going to scroll backwards through them because we've already had some questions, and Philip and I will do our best to answer. Okay, so the first question is from Fatima. She has she's working in the energy industry currently, has been for the last 3 years, and registered for associate membership. Is that the correct step? Yes, absolutely. As I said, associate membership is for those who are looking to progress and work towards professional membership and professional registration, and it's mandatory. So absolutely, you've taken the correct first step in becoming an associate member. Your next step is to have a look at the different options that we offer, the different professional membership grades and registrations, and depending on what you do, depending on your discipline, decide which one is most suitable. And then, yeah, download the pack and have a look at the guidance and take a closer look at what's required. Philip, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that's fairly comprehensive, Terry. Obviously the right thing to have done, and now you can start to, as Terry was saying, think about the next step, but you can do that in conjunction with either attending events or talking to membership department about what you want to do next.
Absolutely. Okay, the next question is apologies for any slight delays here. Scrolling through the questions. Question from Mervyn, who has 9 to 10 years experience in energy. Currently a member, but I'm not sure which grade. I'm presuming an associate or an affiliate in the meantime. You might want to rewrite a question, Mervyn, and confirm that. Can you confirm what the next grade will be, is the question. So I suppose, again, that depends on what your degree was and what exactly you're doing right now. Perhaps best to have a look at the membership page of our website, have a look at the different grades we offer and the competencies that we're looking for, and do that gap analysis that I was talking about. That will help you to establish which grade is most suitable if you're not sure. But obviously, it's very hard for me to recommend any grade off the top of my head with the information I have to hand. But if you want to send me more information via email afterwards, I'd be more than happy to look at it.
Can I just say, Terry, that sounds like, and I just literally sounds like, given what you repeated, the person has, what was it, 8 or 9 years experience in the energy field plus a first degree behind them. It sounds as though, and again, just what I've heard, that they should be able to apply for member, and what they would do is what you suggested, just have a look at the member competencies and see, based on what they've been doing, etc., how they map that to the member competencies. Otherwise, it would, as you rightly said, I think be probably associate. But I would have thought, having had that length of time, that you could look to member. But again, without further information, I couldn't couldn't comment further.
That's a very good point, and something I didn't mention before earlier in the webinar. You can actually apply for one of our professional membership grades first, and then a professional registration further down the line later when you have more relevant experience. And people do that. They'll apply for member MEI now because they've got a few years experience in energy, and they'll apply for example, chartered engineer registration a bit later. If you're ready now, then apply for both. That's probably the easiest way. But if you want to get member first and chartership later, that option is open and available to you. Okay.
There's a question, Terry, in front of me. I don't know if it's from Maha Khan. Thank you for the very informative presentation. Just wanted to double check. Did Philip mention the competence grid can be written in a bullet pointed format? Have you seen that question?
I have now.
Okay, fine.
Do you want to lead on that one?
Absolutely, Maha. That you can use bullet a bullet pointed list against the competence. As I said, it's less of a piece of prose in the competence grid than it is in the PDR. So using bullets, which, as you know, can consist of 2 or 3 sentences anyway, is absolutely fine.
Okay, I have nothing further to add really to that. Apart from reiterate the fact that in the guidance notes, there is a section on how to write your PDR, and there is a section on how to write your competence grid. So there's plenty of advice, written advice for you to have a look at. But obviously, Philip's given you some good pointers in addition to those. There's a question from James here, whether there's a certification cycle. I'm not entirely sure, I'm not 100% sure what you mean. If you want to clarify, if you mean in terms of keeping your professional membership and registration up to date, then, well, yeah, you are required to, and it's written into the EI's code of conduct, that you are required to maintain your CPD moving forward. And we do every year ask for a random selection of members to submit their CPD, just to check that. And obviously, professional memberships and registrations do have an annual fee to pay, and that must be paid each year as well to maintain your registration. Not sure if that's what you meant, but might be useful anyway. Okay, question from Anish. How to link up CPD documents depending on company policies. Don't know if you can see that, Philip. I'm not sure.
I can't see that. No, I
Okay.
can see another question. But anyway, yeah, okay, it's fine.
Again, Anish, I don't know if you want to come to me separately and elaborate on that. But you're free to use our CPD paper template form, which I believe is in the application pack. Or if you're a member, you can use My Career Path, the online professional development tool, for free. If I've misunderstood your question, please come back to me.
Can I just say, Terry, some large corporates, if I can call them that, have very stylized processes for development, and people who are in those processes are quite lucky. They can then, or they usually do, just submit copies of those development records, and that's perfectly acceptable for CPD. Obviously, other companies perhaps don't have such a stylized process, and therefore you would like to think to use something like My Career Path from the Energy Institute, or indeed record it in some other way as you may wish. There isn't a law that says you have to do it in a particular way. If you like, the law is that you have to do it, and so you should be recording your CPD such that when asked, you can actually then put it on the table, so to speak. And in some areas, as I mentioned earlier, it is mandatory, and if you can't produce it, then you will get asked to, if pardon me, go away and do it. So it is that important now.
I think, as rereading the question, I think that the company in question might not allow them to use that CPD or forward that CPD information to the professional body. So I'm not sure how you necessarily get around that, but yeah, I haven't heard that before, to be honest.
Well, I think there are occasions when I've seen it with, strangely enough, other institutions where there is, should we say, secrecy involved because of national security with some work, and therefore there's issues about how that's presented. And I think people understand that. And the one thing to say is that the whole process is completely confidential, and indeed some people, certainly some people I've met, have actually got various security clearances to look at some of the information that people refer to, and I get concerned about putting on the table, so to speak. But in a CPD context, I would have thought it would be fairly easy to, if you can't use the company's records, to actually extract the information necessary and put it into another form of record. I know it's a bit more work, but if that's what you need to do, well, that's what you'll need to do.
Thank you, Philip. There's a few questions here from Aaron. Aaron, I've promised to get back to you after the webinar. I will speak to our professional membership team straight away following the webinar, and we will be in touch with some further advice to you. It's probably better to answer your questions that way. A question from Kareem about a link to find these slides and the recording. Yes, what I will do is send an email round to everyone that signed up, whether they listened or not, and so you'll be able to go to our website, click on the link, and that will take you directly to the EI's YouTube channel, where you'll be able to re-watch, re-listen to this webinar, and you'll be able to see the slides too.
So I've got a couple of questions in front of me, Terry, on the chat stream. Another one from Maha Khan, and then from Saad Tanweer. So I think the fees one, you could probably best answer that. I'm not entirely sure about fees, I think.
I've got a couple of questions before those then. I'll just
Okay.
work my way down. So a question from James, who recently promoted. Congratulations. Works in a role without direct reports. but larger regional responsibilities. Did have 6 people reporting to him in a previous role. Can he submit 2 organograms? What would? Well, I think if you can get hold of the previous organogram, then absolutely fine. If for whatever reason, and we've had this before, you can't submit an organizational chart, sometimes we get that from consultants, for example, then you can write a note in your PDR to explain that, but also really bring out your leadership and management skills in your PDR and grid, which is what, they are some of the competencies we're looking for anyway. So just make it really explicit in your PDR and grid how you can demonstrate all the leadership and management skills. If for whatever reason you can't submit an organizational chart, but if you can get hold of a previous one, then fantastic. Anything to add, Philip?
Yeah, sure. It's perfectly acceptable to submit 2 PDRs, 2 organograms or org charts in your PDR or your application. And indeed, the other thing I would say to you is that if you're concerned about the fact that you're perhaps not supervising as many people now as you were in the past, again, that's understandable. The point is that you need to have demonstrated that you've done it at some stage. So, and that would be perfectly acceptable for you to say that. So we don't necessarily look at, if you like, your last year's worth of activities. We're looking at your, as we said earlier, the progression of your energy career and what you've done in it and how you've met the competencies as you've done that.
Okay, question from Mike about applying for professional grade of membership without having any academic accreditations. So they might come up through an apprenticeship route, for example. This could be quite a long answer. Essentially, you could apply for one of our membership grades. Well, actually, sorry, you can apply for any professional membership grade or registration, even if you don't have accredited qualifications. But for certain titles like CEng, Chartered Engineer, Incorporated Engineer, there is an educational requirement. So if you don't meet the educational requirement for CEng in full, let's say, then there are other things that you need to do. So in that case, we have something called interim registration, which you would need to do before you apply for CEng in full or IEng. And that involves demonstrating the foundation technical knowledge and understanding required, i.e. the educational bit. And that involves filling out an additional form. So you would need to get through that interim registration process before you apply for CEng or IEng in full. You can actually apply for MEI, member of the Energy Institute, even without a qualification, as long as you can demonstrate all the MEI competencies, because a lot of stuff you'll be writing about is your professional experience and what you've achieved in energy. So I hope that helps slightly. Philip, do you want to expand on that?
No, I think you're perfectly correct. Essentially, you need to demonstrate what's called the exemplifying qualifications through work-based experience if you don't have academic qualifications, and the forms you will fill up will be to do that. And there's another, strangely enough, another panel inside the EI that will look at that and reach a conclusion as to whether or not you meet those exemplifying requirements. And if you do, then you just get told, and you get told then to apply for a professional registration.
And if you have as I said, there are 2 sets of guidance notes, and one of those sets of guidance notes will explain what you need to do if you don't meet that educational requirement. So there's lots of information to read through there well that might help. Okay, question from Saad, who is an associate member with almost 4 years experience, interested in CEng. Yes, there's a requirement to have a CEng sponsor. How do you overcome that if you don't know any chartered engineers accredited by the EI in your area? I think in summary is the question. As far as I'm aware, I mean, it is actually a requirement, a mandatory requirement to have a CEng sponsor as one of your 2 sponsors. I think there are alternatives in that you can have a professional engineer who's registered in the States, for example. That's seen as an equivalent to a CEng here. Just to clarify, they don't need to be registered with the EI. If you know chartered engineers that are registered with another professional body, but not the EI, absolutely fine. You can have those as your sponsors. And it's something we can't do, unfortunately, is to pair you up with a CEng sponsor. The onus is actually on you to find and identify suitable sponsors. You might find EI events and networking opportunities as a way of finding someone who's willing to support you with that journey. Have I missed anything there, Philip?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think attending, if there's nobody inside the company you work with, or you might be working alone perhaps, then the obvious way to go would be to attend an EI event, or indeed if you want to meet some CEngers, or indeed any other engineering institution event where you would meet CEngers if you can't do EI ones where you are, and that way you will find people who are CEngers through networking.
Question from Mahar about fees for the chartership process, not the membership fee. So yes, so if you're applying for one of our additional titles, such as chartered engineer or chartered environmentalist, the application fee is £75. If you go to the membership and careers section of our website and scroll down quite far, you will see a box called membership fees or fees, and you'll be able to see a full list of application fees, annual subscription fees, etc. It's all listed there. Okay, question from Thomas. I might let you lead on this one, Philip, if that's okay. What's the main difference between a chartered engineer and an incorporated engineer, CEng or IEng? Perhaps he's not sure which to.
Yeah, okay. I think if I had to summarize in a short time, I would say the main difference is that the IEng would predominantly use extant technology off the shelf, in other words, whereas the chartered engineer would be actually developing technology. So there is a clear emphasis in the CEng categorization for innovation, and that doesn't appear in the IEng area. So in other areas, for example, in leadership and management, the competencies are virtually the same. And you know, I've met IEngers who are supervising lots of people, responsible for big budgets, etc., etc. But they don't do some of the other things to do with the finer points of technology. And just going back to that again, in the A and B area, another area where there's a distinction would be on the design side. Again, it's related perhaps back to innovation. Some designs are off the shelf, so an area perhaps I know more about than others might be network design for electricity systems, whereas if you were doing some new design work, being creative, in other words, that would be the thing that would differentiate you between the iEng level and the cEng level. There are small differences in other competencies elsewhere, but I think what I've said there is the if you like, the central differences.
Yeah, and I suppose that gap analysis exercise might help if you're not sure which to apply for. Then download the competence grids for both and see which ones you can demonstrate and with confidence, and which ones perhaps you can't if there are more gaps in one or the other. But I think, Philip, you've given a good overview there in terms of what you actually do in your role. A question from Sadia Bama, who is an affiliate member based in Malaysia, interested in cEng. Do I need to become a member first before applying for cEng? So I did touch on this earlier. You have two options essentially. You can either apply for member first and then chartered engineer later, if perhaps you're not quite ready for cEng. But if you are ready and you're keen to apply for both, then yes, you can apply for both at the same time. And that, I say, is what most people tend to do. As an affiliate member, don't worry about transferring to associate member before upgrading. You can still start the process to apply for cEng, even as an affiliate member. A question from Olatunde, who asks if you can apply for fellow membership directly if you are not yet a member, presumably an MEI. Again, yeah, that option is available. If you feel that you are suitable for the grade of fellow and you can demonstrate all of the fellow competencies, then yes, absolutely. There's no reason why you can't apply for fellow straight away. Would you agree with that, Philip?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I've seen applications just like you've described. People are awarded a fellow without an interview, just by coming straight in. And I've also seen people who, strange enough, had one recently who start off applying for fellow and various other additions and end up not meeting anything and actually getting, strangely enough, not even admitted as a member. So it is important what you said earlier, Terry, to actually sit down and look at your own background and then competencies that are required and just map them over. But there's no problem if you want to apply for a fellow straight away, with or without a professional registration. It will get assessed in the round with everyone else.
Okay, thank you. We've probably got time for one more question because we've overrun by a few minutes. I'm just scrolling down. If we're unable to answer your question today, also I've taken a note of your questions and I will come back to you separately with a response. So please don't worry if we can't answer it right now. We will respond to you afterwards. So the final question is from Paul, who is building orientated, if you like, BSc in surveying, an OND in building construction, running his own business for 8 years as a commercial energy assessor. Will that allow him to be considered for membership? Do you want to take that, or do you want me to?
Well, the straight answer, Terry, or the short answer is yes.
Yes. Yeah.
By the sound of it, it'll just be then a question of whether there should be anything else that would go with it, and a discussion might like to take place about energy manager registration or energy engineer registration, but that will be dependent on all the sorts of things we talked about earlier in the webinar. But certainly for membership, yes.
Yeah, I suppose that brings us back to the very beginning of the webinar when I said that the EI is an industry-focused professional body. So clearly you're working in the energy industry, and you have been for a number of years, because you're doing the work that you do in energy, then absolutely you can apply for professional membership with us. And as Philip said, you know, maybe have a look at some of the additional titles that we can award to see if they fit too. Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Just to repeat, thank you very much to everyone who listened and signed in today. We truly appreciate it. And we are looking forward to receiving your application in the near future. The next deadline is the 27th of July, but there's a deadline approximately every 2 months. So maybe one to aim for there. Thank you, Philip, as well, for your contribution. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.